Sego, Buzu, Kamusta. Hi, I'm Mark Abley. Ni hao, unukut, bonsoir. We'll hear a bunch of disruptive ideas tonight, but I want to come at disruption a bit differently. I hope to make you think about the languages in which these ideas reach us. This country functioned for a century on the basis that it was basically an English-speaking nation that just happened to have a French-speaking minority. A lot of people still think of it that way. It's almost 50 years since the government led by Justin Trudeau's father took what was at the time the controversial step of declaring Canada an officially bilingual nation. But since 1969, demographics have changed in Canada dramatically, beliefs have changed too, and these changes may exert a profound and disruptive impact on how Canadians view our country. Consider, right here in the metropolitan area of Toronto, there are more than 2,500,000 people whose mother tongue is neither English nor French. Their mother tongue is what the government calls non-official. That's more people living in the GTA speaking a non-official mother tongue than the total combined populations of the 4 Atlantic provinces. The most widely spoken of these languages in Toronto are Cantonese, Mandarin, Punjabi, Filipino, and Urdu. They have no official status in Canada, but they're all growing fast. And just as Toronto has become an incredibly multilingual city, so Canada is now becoming an incredibly multilingual country. For my Walrus article, Beyond Bilingualism, I spent a week in Winnipeg in the middle of January. I have a terrible sense of timing. And I found that the second most widely spoken language there after English, and as in Edmonton and Calgary, is Filipino. That's something nobody of my generation, growing up on the prairies as I did in the 70s, could have imagined or predicted. I drove past a Toyota dealership in Winnipeg's North End that says on its website, "We are proud to speak English, Punjabi, Filipino, Hindi, Arabic, Portuguese, Polish, Ukrainian, and French." So it pays to be multilingual. And the idea of official bilingualism is now beginning to come under pressure, not just from right-wing blowhards who think that if English was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for us, but also from some people who speak immigrant languages. I talked to a Filipino community leader who put it this way: "It's the second language of Manitoba. We defeated the French." I'm concerned that the linguistic and cultural difference between our major cities and the small towns and rural areas is something that may prove more and more disruptive in the future. Look south of the border and think of the enormous gaps in outlook between, let's say, New York and Idaho, or between San Francisco and Arkansas. Is that kind of unbridgeable divide about to afflict Canada? Language is just one element in that divide, but it's a crucial element. In 2018, it's not just demographics that are changing at a disruptive pace, it's also beliefs. Nothing sums up that change better than the strong and creative presence now of so many Indigenous writers, artists, and thinkers. So, to look back a century, Canada's Deputy Minister of Indian Affairs, a man named Duncan Campbell Scott, wrote the following lines: "The race has waned and left but tales of ghosts that hover in the world like fading smoke about the lodges. Gone are the dusky folk that once were cunning with the thong and snare and mighty with the paddle and the bow. They lured the silver salmon from his lair and gambled in the teepees until dawn, but now their vaunted prowess all is gone, gone like a moose track in the April snow." It's unthinkable, thank goodness, that any Canadian poet could write lines like that now. Scott was not also a poet, he also oversaw the Indian Act for a generation and was the main architect of the residential school system. One of the countless ironies of his work is that the poem I just quoted goes on to praise the beauty of what Scott called Indian place names, Toronto and Winnipeg among them. But he uttered this praise out of a belief that Indigenous languages, like Indigenous people, were disappearing. We're becoming a museum piece. We're doomed. Not so. The number of Indigenous people in this country is at least 12 times greater than it was when Scott wrote that poem, Indigenous people have not waned, their vaunted prowess is not gone, and in the aftermath of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report, Canada is finally waking up to the fact that more than 50 Indigenous languages in this country, languages, not dialects, still survive. What a wealth of knowledge and understanding they embody. Many of these languages are in desperate trouble. In all of metropolitan Toronto, according to the last census, only 575 people spoke an Indigenous language as their mother tongue. So the odds may seem terrible, but the determination is great. Terrific work is being done, for example, in the Six Nations Reserve just down Highway 403, where the Mohawk language is growing in the minds and voices of young adults and children. Some Indigenous languages still remain vibrant, not just the far-flung languages like Cree and Inuktitut, but also more localized ones like Atikamekw in central Quebec and Carrier in northern British Columbia. And at long last, the federal government has taken notice. When I received the invitation to speak tonight, I hoped it would be possible to remind you that an Indigenous Languages Act had recently been tabled in Parliament. That's not yet true. I'm told the target date is now December 15th. The work is taking longer than planned. But when it does happen, and I'm optimistically saying when rather than if, languages like Ojibwe, which have been spoken in the Toronto area for hundreds if not thousands of years, will at last have some formal recognition. And the work to preserve and strengthen these languages will at last receive stable, long-term funding. In short, Canada was always multilingual. Because of colonialism, we just didn't accept the fact. But now, especially in our major cities, it's become abundantly clear how multilingual we are. The passage of an Indigenous Languages Act stands to give the founding languages of this country a status they have never previously enjoyed. I'm not always proud of what the federal government does, but the idea of an Indigenous Languages Act makes me very happy. Niawan, Nakrumik, Miigwech.